Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Out of Many, a conversation series featuring our national academicians that are participating in the digital exhibition E Pluribus Out of Many, curated by Dr. Kelli Morgan. I'm Adrienne Elise Tarver, the Director of Programs here at the National Academy of Design. If you haven't yet explored the show, please do so when you have the chance. We're going to include the link to the exhibition in the chat. This exhibition contends with the challenge of creating a virtual exhibition, not just during a waning pandemic, not just amongst social upheaval and political turmoil, but also amongst a group of artists who are as different as they are interesting. E Pluribus features over 100 academicians and asks the question, what new futures can be created if Americans stop pursuing the ideal of national unity and accept our reality as an incongruent collective? Tonight, artist Lorraine Shemesh joins E Pluribus curator Dr. Kelli Morgan in conversation. Please join us after the conversation for a live Q&A with Lorraine and Kelli. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen throughout the conversation, and we will make sure Lorraine and Kelli see your questions at the end. And hello, Kelli. Now I'd love to introduce our E Pluribus curator, Dr. Kelli Morgan. She is the newly appointed inaugural director of curatorial studies and professor of the practice and history of art and architecture at Tufts University in Boston. She's a curator, educator, and social justice activist who specializes in American art and visual culture, and her scholarly commitment to the investigation of anti-Blackness within those fields has demonstrated how traditional art history and museum practice work specifically to uphold white supremacy. Dr. Morgan has held curatorial positions at the Indianapolis Museum of Art at Newfields, the Birmingham Museum of Art, and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. She has held teaching positions at the Tyler School of Art and Architecture at Temple University, Wayne State University, and the University of Michigan, where she merged the classroom and the museum gallery to create various anti-racist paradigms for how curators can actively address the complexities of traditional art history, community engagement, and scholarly innovation. In 2014, Morgan was awarded a dissertation fellowship from the Ford Foundation and earned her PhD in Afro-American Studies and a graduate certificate in Public History Museum Studies from the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 2017. Hello, Kelli, how are you?
Hi, Adrienne, how are you? I'm good.
I'm great.
But I'm good.
It's that time of year where we're getting cold and maybe a little tired, but I'm really excited to hear this conversation with you and Lorraine.
I am too. Super, super excited. I'm like, this is our penultimate.
It's our penultimate.
I know.
One more.
Oh gosh.
We won't see each other almost every week anymore.
I know. I was literally telling Greg about that like a couple weeks ago, where I was like, I totally miss seeing you guys like every couple of weeks. Like we got to come up with a reason.
We'll still get together. Virtual hangouts. All right, I'll let you get to it.
So, hi everybody, welcome. It is totally my pleasure to introduce Lorraine Shemesh. Lorraine's work has been exhibited at the Butler Institute of American Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Bronx Museum, the Museum of the City of New York, RISD Museum, the Musée du Kerouac in Switzerland, and the National Academy of Design, the Nasher Museum, Boise Art Museum, the Frye Art Museum, and so many more. She will be the artist, or has been, I should say, the artist in residence at Dartmouth College this fall. So we'll have a good time, discussing some of the work she did up there. She's also taught painting and drawing at RISD and Amherst College. Lorraine received her MFA from the Tyler School of Art and is a distinguished alumni, or won the Distinguished Alumni Award in Visual Arts from Boston University. She's also won a Rhode Island State Council for the Arts grant and a Yaddo Watershed Fellowship. Her work has been reviewed in Art in America, The New Yorker, Harper's Magazine, and the New York Times. She's currently represented by Gerald Peters Gallery. Please join me in welcoming Lorraine Shemesh. Hi, Lorraine. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to say a word about what participating in this show has meant to me personally. And I feel like the primal need to simply be who we are without trying to fit into someone else's notion of who we should be is such a great relief. And Out of Many honors that by bringing together artists with very strong but different voices and allowing them to coexist. And, during the very difficult months of the pandemic, when you first began to plan this show, I really enjoyed our conversations, and
Me too.
it opened possibility for me in terms of my relationship to my own work, in relationship to the other academicians and the varying kinds of things they do, and to the possibilities of presenting work online, which initially everybody was resistant to. And yet I was so buoyed up by the end result and the conversations that have taken place between you and some of the academicians, and the way the show was laid out online, juxtaposing people who did very disparate kinds of work, but yet there was a visual dialogue. So thank you for that. I just wanted to acknowledge that before we go on with our
Oh, thank you. That like warms my heart so much. And I think that's like a really good kind of segue to the next conversation, because the next conversation is actually between me and Sara Reisman. And I think it, in that same way, like the same way that you mentioned just now, like a giving artist, like these various entry points, even though Sara and I don't know each other, but I love the way that it's given even her as a curator, like a different entry point, into the institution. Through, this exhibition where like nobody, I remember even in some of those early conversations that we had, I was like, I have no idea what this is getting ready to look like. I don't even know if this is going to work, but I trust Link by Air, and we're going to go. I was really, I've been really happy, with the turnout, with how it turned out, and, how it's been engaged, myself, because I think we never really dwell, and I think this was another kind of very central topic to our conversations, because it's I think also so central to your work. We never dwell in the liminal spaces, Lorraine, right? And like that's where we are majority of the time.
That's right.
So what happens when which is what I love, how your work does that, like when it visualizes that space and the various possibilities in that space, whether it's form, whether it's just recognizing it itself, whether it's moving through it or away from it, like, the spectrum, of the middle spaces, the space in between, right? Like your last, like your last show.
Yeah.
It's just so important for us to grapple, with that. And I think your work speaks so directly to that.
Well, thank you. I think that, it's not that my work tries to provide answers. What my work is doing is providing questions that hopefully people will answer for themselves, that they meet the work on one level and then they enter an unknown world. The space is ambiguous. The relationship between the characters, the figures, is not so specifically known. And hopefully it's open-ended enough that people can project their own experience and perhaps travel someplace new. And I think that the place we find ourselves in the world necessitates that we rethink our manner of problem solving. And we rethink what the real questions are that we want to spend our time with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how to address the solutions individually and as a group.
Yeah. And also being comfortable with we're not going to always agree on what those approaches are.
No. But I really feel that what people want most is not to be agreed with, is that they need to be heard. They need, and we all need to learn how to listen. Without judgment. We need to learn to listen so that we can make a shift in our thinking.
Completely.
And we can hopefully be inclusive as we go forward, because everyone benefits from a different point of view. If you're only in your own head, after a while, it's musty. you know, you need to crack things open
Yeah.
times to let the light in.
To get-
And the spaces in between do that.
Yes, they do. Yes. And I
That's where things breathe.
yeah, completely, right? Because it's a transitional space sometimes.
That's correct.
You know, and I love how, okay, so this is a good segue into something I want to talk about. So I think your work is very bright, vibrant when it comes to color, like how you use color in the paintings in which you do. But I love that you started, you know, in exploring these liminal spaces and these in-between spaces in the black and white.
That's correct.
So can we start with your can we pull up your slides, you know, and maybe talk more about how you progress, you know, which is fascinating from like a black and white standpoint.
Yes.
Because we never talk about the gray.
No.
But that's kind of like what we're talking about right now, right?
Yes, we are. It would be nice if everything was so clear, but
yes.
These paintings and you know, when you're using when you're working with the figure, you're dealing with a charged form. Psychologically and physically, but certainly visually. And the question I always ask myself is, how do you bring the figure to life and give it a pulse so that it can express something about the human condition in poetic form? And I am using as my models 2 professional dancers whose bodies are very flexible, so that they're able to, when they move together, to become a larger form. And I designed and fabricated these unitards with the bands, and the costumes had a hood that was made out of mesh to cover the features of their face so that they would more easily read as one form. And sometimes the hardest thing about painting is what you leave out rather than what you put in, as indicated in this painting, where the right figure's right arm becomes the left figure's left arm. So they're sharing a limb, so that formally the flow of the movement is more organic in the upper portion. And the gesture of those arced arms is to balance off the very graphic feeling of the stripes. And I also am very interested in the idea of using a void. The void shape in the negative space is what provides the air that circulates around the figures, hopefully. So this series of paintings was called Intersections, and they actually were made at a time of personal grief in my life, where I just couldn't work with bright color. You know, I needed to work with a more subdued palette. And in working over a series of 3 years, I worked on these paintings, and they kind of put me back on my legs. You know, I was different at the end of the series, but I felt strong again and whole again and able to work. And the weaving of black and white shapes is something I've also developed when I work with clay. So you can see some of the pieces that are behind me. I've worked on a lot of very simple geometric forms, using rectangles or circles or triangles, and a pattern wrapped around that. And they became the visual inspiration for the paintings.
Okay.
And I think the next slide also, you know, the models were taking a break in my studio, and I was standing on a ladder, and I looked down and I saw this, and I said, oh my goodness, you know, hold that.
Yeah.
And the rigid patterning of the checkerboard kind of locks them into a cage where they can hardly move. And it's also evocative for me of the way I felt at that time. I just, things seemed closed off and boxed in, And I was just grateful to be able to go into the studio and work, but it wasn't a relaxed time where I was able to be very improvisational. And I
I
think,
love seeing this in relationship, to your ceramics, because
yeah,
because for me, that confinement is definitely there.
yes,
But because of the shape of particularly their calves,
yeah,
like
yeah,
there's a flow there,
yes,
and almost, I hate to say pixelated, but like how we see pixelated imagery.
yeah,
So going back to the possibility of that middle space,
yes,
right?
yes.
You know,
And also, the conversation between flat and round, the
yeah.
conversation between tight and loose, those formal elements also are a part of the making that results in the emotional quality of the piece. And after I did a bunch of these paintings, I then returned to working with brighter color. But during the pandemic, I found myself very much needing to go back to this kind of a palette where it felt like the blood was draining out of all of us. All of our effort was being put in a daily basis to just staying alive. And I found it strengthening to be able to work again with this kind of an idea. I think the next slide was more recently from the last couple of years. And the painting Tangle, it's more organic and more improvisational in the way the pattern is used. So, and also in the edge handling of the paint is more open. The wonderful thing about working with live models is that they do move, and that movement, that sway, that flickering gives a sense of life for me, that this is not an eggplant. This is a living, breathing person, and there's a vibration involved. That's exciting when you work because you don't close it off, and things change every time they come. It changes, and then I work on them without the models. Certainly I had to do that in the beginning of the pandemic. Nobody was seeing anybody, and I was working from drawings, but it was empowering for me to be able to work. Just the act of working was life enhancing. I kind of stopped judging myself so harshly, and I just thought, just let me work. It's not my decision whether this is good or bad. I just need to make something, to witness this time for myself. It's like, I think making art is like footprints in the snow. It helps bring you home.
Yeah, I
You
love
know,
that.
it helps bring you home.
Yeah, I super love
And I think that, I do have a studio at home, so I was able to continue to work at my own pace without the pressure of, I need to do this. I need to hit
where
the
you're just
deadline.
cranking out. Yeah,
Exactly.
or this show, or
I really stopped doing that. I really just worked for the life enhancing quality that it provided for me.
Yeah, talking to you all, over these last 6 to 7 weeks, has done a lot, even though I don't really consider myself a maker, but it's done that, like just listening to all of you, and I always think like how lucky I am, to be a curator, but it's been this challenge. I think this whole show has really challenged my like preconceived notions, because it's been like, this is why people work with living artists, because I'm usually in the dead artists side of things, and then the dead artist side of things, you're just like, oh, this is great because it's like the archive and the books and nobody talks back to you. You can just be in your head, But talking to you, to the academicians over actually over the course of the last year, basically, but just these conversations. And it's like, I feel that same kind of yearning, like, God, I wish I was a maker. Or maybe I should start painting. Like after my conversation with Sangram, I was really like, maybe I need to take a painting class. Because for me, curators work in that same way too, where because museums are constantly moving.
Right.
And it's like this dinner, this show, this, there's always something. And to stop in that moment, for so long, it took me a while. Like I had to kind of adjust, to it for a minute. And then once I did, I was like, oh, prioritizing rest is like a thing one should do. Okay. Like that was really great. And kind of feeling that, like part that creative force maybe, or they like creative presence, and saying, yeah, like now I get, why, not so much like why artists are like, important culturally, right? But like the impetus of making something, like of being able to kind of produce something that doesn't exist, to make tangible something that may be intangible.
It provides sustenance,
Yeah.
like food. And I think, you have such a creative mind, and you present issues and questions that are very linked to making things. I think it's like a wonderful meal. It fills you up. If you can just allow yourself not to judge as you make things, that you have a developed eye. But I think you would love just the tactile aspect of it is so satisfying. I mean, the wonderful thing about working with clay initially is that, it encompasses all the elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And you can make something and then eat something out of it. It can be functional. And there's something so deeply satisfying about that. And, even in the beginning when things are cracked and they're warped and your expectation is very different than what the finished piece is, it shrinks, but you begin to fall in love with all those imperfections, and it brings you back to yourself in a forgiving way, and in a way that makes you open to learning and trying things that you never would have before. Yeah. And I think that's what's wonderful about being alive, getting to have a life, is to have that experience, to give that experience to yourself, whether it's with paint or whatever material, or a pencil or clay or a piece of wire. I mean, it can be anything, but I think you would love it. And all the things you've done in the past become part of that. It's not separated. So at a certain point, all the things we love come together, if you're lucky. And there's something very feeling satisfied for a moment, when we're not beating ourselves up with expectation. That's enriching.
No, absolutely. I've been on this whole like leaning in, to myself more. Because I think that's something else that because I quarantine, even though I quarantined in the same city, with my family, we were in separate spaces. So it was fascinating, to be, and I'm alone most of the time, right? But it was a different kind of space, to experience oneself. So it's like working on, this show in that time too, having, just the different submissions, push me in, certain ways, where I was like, I didn't think about that like that, or looking at a piece and being like, oh my God, that is my life, in like submission number 39, right? It was such an enriching, process, for me. And like your work was also one of those works, or the group of work, because I know we talked, over a series, had a series of conversations. It's like I found myself, kind of going in, to those spaces. And that was what I was trying to do, like to show that, there's this group of people, group of artists, right? Like, group of Americans, Jones, like all of the different monikers. And it was fascinating to see, all the different responses to the prompt, but also like how interestingly they fit together.
Yes, in ways that nobody would have imagined.
Yeah.
That we have more in common than we might have thought.
Mm-hmm.
And even if we live in the world more openly and more open to someone else's experience, I think it's that ability to connect is powerful.
And do people find that when they encounter your work, Lorraine? Like, is that something, are those conversations engendered, or do they have to be necessarily led?
Well, I'll tell you, I was standing at an opening once, and someone that I didn't know came up to me and said, I know what you were thinking when you did this. And I said, really? Tell me what I was thinking. And they proceeded with a very convoluted explanation of what they thought the work was about. And they said, am I right? And I said, well, I don't know if you're right, but I don't think it's a question of right.
Yeah.
But now I know a lot about you.
Mm-hmm.
Because, it was a wonderful moment for me because this person had entered the world of my painting and brought to it their own experience. And I think that's what art can do, is that it sheds a light on something we didn't know we knew. And, and there is a subconscious elements involved in making your choices as you make something. There are conscious things also, but I've been at this long enough to know that there's unconscious stuff that feeds in. There are elements of connection and disjuncture. There are elements of power and control. They're evident. There's all kinds of elements, psychological elements that one could adhere to the work, but there's also formal choices. I'm thinking of, abstraction and figuration, having a conversation.
Yeah.
And that's something you can spend your lifetime just on that one conversation.
Completely.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, because I think that was one of the first things that stood out, that struck me about your work, was encountering it at a time where human connection was so necessary.
Yeah.
But also so dangerous.
Yes.
And so difficult because of the polarization, right?
Yes.
Polarization. And it was like, okay, so where do we go? Because as human beings, we can't do this life thing alone. And we find ourselves in a probably, I wouldn't necessarily say the first, but I think probably the first major, global, emergency for my generation.
Yeah.
And not having, physically not being able to actually reach out and touch the person, and it was like, okay, so now what?
It was a time of trying to hold on while having to learn to let go.
Yeah.
That simultaneous, no, you can't come near me. Please come near me. No, you can't. That back and forth is very much a part of the work I made.
Yes.
And it made it, it made it possible for me to go on to the next day because I was not pushing those feelings away. I think in my earlier life, when I had difficult feelings, I didn't want them to overtly, come out of my mouth or come onto the canvas. where now I'm at a point where when I'm feeling really at odds about things, I sit quietly with it and let myself feel it. And then it works its way into the canvas. It just does.
Let it, as I always say, Kelly, you have to let it flow through.
Exactly.
And then I saw this meme, I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 weeks ago. And it had broken down emotion as like energy in motion.
Right.
I was like, I've never thought about it like just I can be so green sometimes. But I was like, I've never heard that before. And I was like, that is like so cool. So I like wrote it on a post-it and like put it on my little mirror. Because that's been really, I've been like that, majority of my life, where it's like I will push it down.
Right.
And kind of bury it. And I think we all kind of struggle with that. And in recent years, it's just, I have been just letting myself, whatever it is, letting myself feel it. I'll say all the time, like, I know my depression and my sadness way better than I know my anger. So I'm working on the anger. I said, but oh my God, just
it's a relief
to flow out is so helpful.
It's a relief. If we go to the next slide, I think when color returns, and this is the slightly earlier painting, and this is a painting, where there is connection that is palpable, but there's also sadness. There's also this holding on for dear life kind of quality that, we all experience as human beings. We all experience loss. We all experience sadness. We all experience also joy. We're capable as human animals of running the gamut from A to Z. We don't just go A to B. Right. And if in making work, we only go from A to B, the motivation is very evident to the viewer.
So this is one, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
This is one out of, all the images that you've shown me since we met, that shadow figures very prominently, in this one, Lorraine.
Yes.
So I think maybe you're not necessarily using light differently, but the presence of light, takes a different kind of command in this work than I think some of the other ones. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. These are relatively shallow spaced compositions. They're almost like bas-reliefs. The figures seem to be pulling not too far away from the made up surrounding. But I'm also interested in camouflage and the way people camouflage their feelings, and in the way animals camouflage themselves to stay alive in the wild. There are those animals, the skin color changes as they're on the bark of a tree, the pattern changes so that their predators will not see them. So I was playing with the figure ground relationship and wanting to dissolve the figure and yet not wanting to lose its volume. So the cast shadow has a kind of ominous quality to it, but it also gives it a three-dimensional quality. But these are made up, imagined spaces. So the formal way this was done is that I wove origami paper. But instead of cutting the paper vertically and horizontally, I cut it more organically. Like African kubecloths, there's that improvisational nature to the kinds of shapes that are used. And I pulled this out to show you.
Cool.
This was the original, this was the flat, a piece that I worked from, that the dancers were wearing white unitards, and I imagined the pattern on top, but I wanted the pattern to run into the surrounding space so that the abstract motion, the rhythmic quality would be formally what the piece was about, that the viewer would move around the composition. So that was the cast shadow is the thing that pulls the figures forward in space. So and it is heavier. It's handled in a heavier manner than it was in the ones that came afterwards. I think if you look at the next one, yeah, the pattern in this one was I had a friend who was a mathematician, and he worked with these forms called hypercubes, which is a kind of mathematical structure that's in the fourth dimension. And things move in space in a way that isn't the reality we know. But I found it to be a very interesting structure. So I did this little watercolor of a hypercube, and then I ran it over the two figures. And the patterns are, completely unpredictable and not real. It's an imagined world. But you see the tension between these two figures as she turns her head away. The feeling is different than if she was looking at him. That the gesture that is chosen has to do with nuance of feeling. That when there's more than one person in any given room, my experience is that there are politics involved. People speak at each other. And one person is talking, the other person's in their own head. They're not hearing what the person is saying. It takes practice to just listen.
Yeah. I heard there was a phrase, that I kind of keep in mind. I heard it recently, but since I've heard it, it's we listen to hear, instead of listening to respond. Because it's always the next thing, and again, in curatorial culture, that's the thing, we overtalk each other all the time. Because the ideas, and then in their egos, right? As well.
You think?
Yeah, right. There's a lot of that going on. But I've noticed that, and we can be the best of friends.
Yes.
But it's we overtalk each other all the time.
Yeah.
Because it's just the culture of kind of needing to get, your point across, your idea out. And when I saw that, statement, I was yeah, I'm gonna work on that more, listening to actually just listen and not to just say, this relates to this thing, that I was thinking about, X amount of days. And or even the ways that I've seen people, they'll respond, even if they don't necessarily know, if they don't have an access point, into whatever you're expressing, and they'll bring it back to something that they're doing that has nothing to do with what you just said.
Right.
Because we focus on speaking back, and not on listening to each other. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
I think I might have mentioned this to you in another conversation, and this has not so much to do with what we're talking about, except it does, is that one of the relationships in the world that I've been inspired by was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was so liberal.
Oh, yeah.
Was such close friends with Anthony Scalia, who was so, and they both loved, they disagreed politically always, but they both loved the opera. And they would go to the opera together with regularity. And there they found common ground. And they really had, I think, the deepest respect for each other. She delivered the eulogy.
I think she eulogized him, actually.
Yes, yeah. when he passed away. And I think that, communicating is an art, listening and what our expectation of communication is. Are we expecting that everyone we speak to agrees with our point of view? I mean,
and I think that's the problem now, right? Where that's the expectation. And then if that's not the case, then it's like war,
Is there anything in between?
Right. and I think we're definitely, dealing with, particularly I think when we're dealing with that politically at a moment where the other side is like ideas and concepts that are like literally not factually correct. And like I think particularly for like people who may be in the middle or even are open, right, who are just like, okay, you're a human being, I'm gonna hear you out, even though like your conservative politics rub me the wrong way. It's like, it's hard. I think it's scary to people, to see people draw their line in the sand on things that like literally are just factually untrue.
Right.
And then they have no
accountability.
Right. Or interest in even hearing that.
Yeah.
1 + 1 is not 3.
It's flummoxing. It's flummoxing. But I don't know. Yeah. I don't, as I said, I don't have answers. I only have questions. I'm constantly staggered by by what you're talking about.
How did something shifted? Even as a historian, I'm like, this is different.
Yeah.
You can definitely like make your critiques of like Richard Nixon, like, but there were certain things that were just like collectively understood.
Yeah.
That it seems like that ground is gone now. Like that foundation is just gone.
But I think we have to find a way with language to move forward, to find solutions collectively. We don't have to agree, but we can't kill each other. We have to use language and the work that we do and find different ways to communicate that are constructive. We can build. Human beings are capable of building and as well as destroying. And it takes the same energy. And we have to work on ourselves, and sometimes we all mess up, and that's okay. But we have to find a way to listen, to be present without judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes it's hard.
I am definitely guilty of it.
I was going to say, except when I'm the one who's judging.
I am super guilty of it because some things I'm just like, I cannot, just recently, just like literally just since I've been here at Tufts, and there have been meetings that I've like completely walked out of because I just won't do it anymore. Yeah. It's like, I don't even want to hear it.
I know it's hard to think, are we still having this same conversation?
Right. Yes.
Are we still there? I find myself saying to people, really? You really? And then I think, Lorraine, that's a tone that is not going to be productive for solving this problem. But I do, it's challenging. It's challenging.
I was talking to my girlfriend, Trisha Paik, who's the director of the Mount Holyoke College of Art, last night. And she said, her and her sister, the whole pandemic, particularly when we were in quarantine, and she said, instead of just going like WTF, like out loud every 5 seconds, she was like, we would just go, seriously now?
Yeah.
Like we had to find another phrase.
Exactly.
I just cracked up. I said, no, me and my sister were totally doing the WTF thing.
I get it. This painting, Trellis, which is the one I think in the show. And I think this is a question of people coming together to somehow build a house, to build a safe haven, even though it's imagined. It's an imagined structure of safety, but it's what we need to learn to build, not just to explode, not just to explode. So, I think that in working during the pandemic, my longing for that wound up in these paintings because, you know, I so wanted to feel the solid solace of people around me who are like-minded.
Yeah.
But maybe, you know, I need to take solace in the things I learned and try to learn with people from people I disagree with.
Right.
You know,
Like even who is it's the James, I'm gonna botch this totally, but it's the James Baldwin quote, you know, about we can totally disagree, but when your disagreement completely ignores my humanity, like we have nothing.
yeah,
to talk about,
exactly.
you know? Yeah.
Exactly.
You know,
And you know, I always think of that Maya Angelou quote, you know, a bird doesn't sing because it has an answer. It sings because it has a song. And I think that's what makers do. That's what writers do.
I love that. Yeah.
That's what our culture can be. We witness the time we're living in, but hopefully with a song, you know, hope rather than a club.
Yes.
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 And a
Wow.
conversation between people cannot be one person is the nail and the other person is the hammer. That does not work for either the nail or the hammer. It's not good. You know, it's just not good. So I'm always looking for that song, you know, to find that melody that doesn't necessarily answer the question, but that lifts my spirits.
Yeah, and like you said, at least allows us to exist collectively.
Exactly.
Yes.
Without destroying each other.
Yeah, I love that.
So
Adrienne, are we at our time? Is 7:50.
You're figuring it out before me. You're just preempting. I didn't want to interrupt such a lovely conversation, and I wanted to make sure you guys had a chance to get through the images. But yes, it is. I'm gonna before I officially interrupt with my own questions, I just want to remind the audience this is your moment to drop your questions in the Q&A. We do have a couple there, but anybody who's holding on to that question in your mind, please use the question and answer function at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we will make sure to answer it. So one, I wanted to say this is lovely, and I feel like I was at an Oprah Super Soul Sunday conversation because you have so many great nuggets, Lorraine, and I wish that people got to see the green room before because I feel like you started the conversation with a lot of them, and you just keep delivering them, so it's great. I wanted to ask about, so these lovely ceramics behind you, and we've got these beautiful human forms in your paintings. And I'm curious about this like question of fragility, you know, in both of these forms, human fragility, we're talking about the emotional sort of fragility we all faced in the midst of the pandemic, and then the ceramics and sort of the parallels I'm seeing between the actual like black and white, you know, geometry, but then the forms of them, and then the fragility of those as well. And I'm curious about how you're thinking about these materials and subjects as you're developing these works.
Well, you know, ceramics, working in clay, you understand how strong the material can be and how fragile it can be. You understand how it's affected by the atmosphere it finds itself in. If there's too much moisture, or if the heat is applied too quickly. And the fragility is much the same as the fragility of the human body and spirit. We're capable of great strength, and yet we're all vulnerable. You know, if the pandemic has taught us nothing else, it's taught us that. It's the great equalizer. So I find it very poignant to be working with the human body in a way very similar to the way I work with clay. There is definitely a formal conversation. I go back and I just spent 8 weeks at Dartmouth working on a new body of work in ceramics. And it was wonderful to have a very large studio to myself to do that in. And that was the benefit of having people not able to be too close together, is that I was given this huge space and I had it all to myself. So I did, I made a bunch of new work, and that was really thrilling. I hope that answered what you were asking, but.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you had the time to work on that body of work.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump into some of the Q&A. So one of the questions I actually had myself, so I'm really glad that was asked. I'll get to that one second because it's the second one that came in. But Bruce Herman says, love your work, Lorraine. Vital, searching, revelatory. Particularly loved seeing it in person in Santa Fe at Gerald Peters. The question is actually about the painting Tangle. And it's a question of whether it's the same one that's on your website that says it's 2010. And then on our slideshow here, we have it listed as 2020. So is that a different painting, or?
I did two versions of that painting. The paint that I used in the first one was fugitive, which the pigment turned pink. So I redid the painting again using a different, more permanent pigment. Sometimes when I'm working, I get careless, and when it's a lake color, it doesn't, over time, the color can, I don't know if you know the landscape, the seascapes of Ryder, they turned very black because he used this alizarin crimson that was a lake color rather than a permanent pigment, and it did not weather well. So I did the same thing, and I then had to correct that. So that's why there are two different dates.
I love that that's a technical answer. I'm a big paint nerd, so that's great to hear the actual.
Well, I had a marvelous teacher in college named Reed Kay, and he wrote a book called The Painter's Companion, which is the penultimate book on the technical aspects. And he would be appalled that I did that without paying attention. And he's now 96 years old, but I often call him with my mess ups because I chose the wrong kind of varnish and I've thrown it all over the painting, and now it's sticky and it won't dry and I can't get it off. And he's like, you're still making these mistakes. And from time to time, when I'm not paying attention, that's what happens. So yes, the answer is yes. I'm still at it, making the mistakes.
Well, I feel like that's also comforting.
Yeah, I hope so. It's always a learning process, like on all levels. It's technically a learning process, formally, emotionally, dealing with how you're feeling and the need to work and getting yourself in there to do the work. And I try to do that with regularity without paying any attention to whether I'm in the mood to do it or not. I try to do it anyway. And but during the pandemic, I did take a lot of naps. So, because I think it was exhausting. It was exhausting.
Yeah,
but
agreed. So our own chief curator at the National Academy, Sara Reisman, asked the question that I'm really glad you asked, Sarah, because I actually was thinking of the same thing or similarly. She says, Lorraine, with the reference to dance in your paintings and the staging of the figures reading like choreography, I wonder if you ever presented your paintings alongside live dancers in an exhibition. Have you ever collaborated with choreographers? What goes into the staging of the paintings?
That's a very astute question, because the initial intersections paintings, the black and white ones, I conceived to actually have I conceived the costumes so that they would be used in a performance on a black stage, so that all you would see was the abstract white and black shapes as the figures moved and interacted. The dance company Pluribus and Momix, the kinds of choreography that they use I think is fantastic. And I would love to work with a choreographer, but no, I have never done that. But it's something that interests me a great deal. I've taken ballet class my entire life. I mean, dance is a lifelong passion of mine, and it's really how I entered the world of art. I took dance class as a child, as many people do, and I would rush to that studio just so that I could sit on the floor and listen to the live piano. I could feel the vibration. But what I really loved was watching the more experienced dancers move through the space. It's like drawing in space, watching them leap across the room. And I have continued to dance, and the models that I've worked with are professional dancers that I met in that class, because I know when they're on tour and when they come home and they're available and have the time to work with me. So yes, I would love to do that, but I haven't had the opportunity. But you know, it's not over yet. Hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I was curious as I was looking at the paintings, and before seeing the paintings in the show, what that relationship was with the models and the dance. It feels like they're dancers, even if you're looking at the painting, you don't know for sure that they're dancers. But there's something about the way that they're also comfortable in their body and with each other.
Well, I used people who have partnered each other. They know each other very, very well, and they're very flexible together. And, I want them to be anonymous, but on the other hand, I want them to be all of us, and they look like they have normal bodies, but when you're with them in person, they're extraordinary. They're just extraordinary physical presences, but they're very flexible. I can draw, when I show them the drawings and they say, the drawings are too good, we can't do that. I said, you're so much better than the drawings. I don't want you to imitate the drawings. I want you to move from this pose to this pose. I put on music and then I tell them stop. But they're just remarkable human beings, but physically they enhance what we are able to do together because of their flexible backs. That curve is really extraordinary to look at. And I try to, heighten that when they leave, and I'm working from the drawings that I've done. So
in some ways you're choreographing them with drawing.
Yes. Yes.
That's, I think, such a lovely concept. That's really interesting.
Yeah, but it's also the music. The music comes through their bodies. It's just, when you've been painting a long time, you hope that the brush is an extension of your arm, that it's not two separate things. With the dancers, the music comes through their limbs. And it's actually years ago, when I first started working with them, when they first posed, I couldn't draw. I just could look. It was so mesmerizing to watch them that even when they're still, they're not. It's quite remarkable to be in a room close to them, let alone to see them perform on stage. And they're taught in rehearsal to try to fall, so that they can know the tipping point of any given movement. And it's that extremity that's so thrilling when you see them on the stage. It's like gravity doesn't affect them in the same way, and ballet denies the existence of gravity. So the movement is upwards towards heaven, where modern dance admits that gravity exists, but mourns its existence. So the movement is downward towards the earth. So it's the difference between this shape and this shape. But I love to watch both. It's ballet and modern dance. So it's extraordinary.
Can you talk a little bit about the costumes? Because I thought it was really interesting to learn that you created the costume like that, the whole, again, you're choreographing the whole scenario in that way.
Yes, when I first moved to New York, before I had a gallery, before, things were really cooking in the studio, I worked in a costume factory for a short period of time. And so I sew, not well, but to make those unitards, I worked with somebody who actually sews very well, but I drew them. And the most difficult part was the hood, the mesh hood, because I wanted them to be able to see, because I did think they would be on stage and they have to be able to see so that they can spot and turn and do what they're going to do. So, we worked it out together. And the thing I love about living in New York is that there is a whole garment district. So there's all this fabric available, and you can find the mesh, you can find the elastic fabric for the form-fitting unitards. And, we worked out where to put the zippers and the whole thing, but it was good. It was good to do that.
I'm going to do one final call to the audience for questions. We had a thank you from Sara for answering that question, Lorraine. Anybody else, this is your moment to ask. And so can I ask maybe what did you said you were working on ceramics in New Hampshire. Can you share a little bit about what you made, where we might be able to, is that all behind, is that what you made behind you?
No.
Oh,
Well, some
okay.
of it, let's see. Let me see. To the left. Here, let's see this one. This is a Japanese process called neriage, which is 400 years old. And it's a way of dyeing the clay. The clay body used is porcelain. And then I dyed it, the black sections, with a powdered mason stain. And you can weave or coil. The exciting thing is that the pattern is like striated rock, like sedimentary rock. It runs on the interior and the exterior of the form, as opposed to painting a pattern on the surface, which is just on the surface. I wanted to have a more natural quality to it. So in order to make this form, I had to build the form first in clay and then make a plaster mold. And then the pattern is made flat, and then it's flipped into the mold. It's a complicated process, but I was able to make 9 different pieces of different sizes. And they will hopefully be shown in a show down the road.
Nice. Well, I can't wait to get those details when they emerge.
Thank you. Oh.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lorraine. It's been such a lovely conversation.
Kelli,
thank you as always, Kelli.
Kelli, you're just the best. I really enjoyed this. And Adrian, thank you. It's just a pleasure. Really a pleasure. Thank you.
The pleasure is all mine. I'm so happy to be able to witness these conversations. As Kelli mentioned, we have one more. This was the penultimate. We have one more that will be between Dr. Kelli Morgan and our Chief Curator, Sara Reisman. That will be next week, same time, same day, Tuesday at 7 p.m. We look forward to seeing you all then. And until then, good night. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.